when I think of immense emotion, I imagine the ocean and how on the surface it might appear to be calm and blue, but underneath there's a lot going on. Let's just say on the surface, pretend everything is okay, pretend that we're strong, but really that's not what's happening.
Hello again, friends and family and members that follow Below the Surface podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. My name is Kurekwa Shemshaik. I'm your host and founder of Below the Surface. Here we celebrate vulnerability. We celebrate freedom through vulnerability and authenticity. Today we are extending something that we talked about last week, which was values. Last week we talked about why values? Why do values matter? And why is there so much hype towards values? Why do people say and ask, are you living according to your values? Are you in alignment with your values? And we also addressed how they show up in our lives, which is something that I want to extend on this week, on how do we actually appreciate and live according to our values? How do we know about them when they show up? How can we see them when they show up in the room? That's something that I've been concerned with because I know there's a reason why we don't live according to them most of the time. It's because, first of all, sometimes we're not aware of them, but when they do show up, and when they do tell us that we're not living according to them, we fail to recognize that they're there. And so that's why I am doing this episode again to talk a little more about something that's, I think, is very tied closely to values. And although on the surface it seems like it isn't, below the surface, I know, pun intended, it is very clear that it's very related to values. So I'm going to title this episode, I'm going to title it, Why? The Power of Why versus Why Not? And I think this actually came to me in a dream, funny enough. And I think the more that I thought about it, it became very clear to me that I needed to share this. It was not meant for me. I think what I realized is what I'm going to share in this podcast, that there's power in asking ourselves why. And how does it connect to values? Well, we'll find out soon. That's why you should stay tuned. But the question of why, I think, is a very powerful thing. I think most of the time we confuse ourselves. We find it hard to make decisions. I've always been someone who struggles making decisions, and I never knew why. Like, should I be doing this? Should I be buying this instead of this? Should I be going to this place instead of this? And I think I became kind of like a child and almost like a victim of the phrase, why not? I think it's taken a lot of years and a lot of learning and a lot of failing for me to realize that the real question I should be asking myself is why and not why not. And I'll explain this in 3 different things. What I hope for you to take away today is that to encourage you to ask yourself a little more on why instead of why not. And also, hopefully, to outline in this discussion as well how that aligns back to your values and why that allows you to live more within your values when you ask yourself the question of why and not why not. And I will finish that by encouraging you to try it for yourself and see how it works. And the 3 main things that I want to cover in this, I feel that asking ourselves the question of why allows us to be more in line with our values, in that it brings out our motivations. It brings out to the surface and out in the light what our internal motivations are when we ask ourselves the question of why. That's the first point that I'm going to make. The second point that I'm going to make is that it allows for accountability. When we are very clear on why and not, when we ask ourselves the question of why, we become very accountable to the things that we end up deciding to do or not to do. And then the third thing is that it allows for us then to be able to correct things and to take accountability for things that don't go well. So I'll start by the first thing, which is that it brings to the surface our internal motivations. Sometimes it's hard, it's really hard to see what our internal motivations are. And I think our internal motivations hide in our struggle to make decisions or struggle to know what we should be doing and why not we should be doing something. And one of those prime examples to put in context for me has been like the decision of on a Friday night whether to stay at home or to go out. And I think that question has been answered by me saying, why not? Why should I go out? I mean, it's fun. There's gonna be friends around and stuff like that. But I kid you not, every moment that I go out, the moment I step into a club, I get this dark cloud over me that says, why the fuck am I here? Excuse my French, but it's literally what happens to me every single time I go out. I'm like, why am I here? And sometimes to make up for that feeling, I even carry I've carried novels to clubs. I know that sounds crazy. I read on my phone, I write notes on my phone, just like to sometimes feel like I am doing something with my time. I think there's a value there that I don't live according to when it comes to going out or staying at home. And I think the value comes in like how I have seen how important it is for me to spend time, especially on weekends, connecting with myself, connecting with the things that are most important to me. This being one of those things, I know I should be doing this instead of going out. I know I should be writing more. I know I should be reading more. I know I should be connecting with my friends more one-on-one, because when we go out, when we go to a club and you're dancing and it's noisy, you don't really get that, which my value is friendship, is connection. And I cannot really do that in a club, like you cannot really connect to your friends, know what's going on with them. So actually I started thinking, and I was telling my girlfriend this, like what I want to be doing more of is like getting my friends together and like, setting up events at home where people come in and have a good time with me. But I just never get around to that. That is my actual value that I'm not living according to. And guess what? It's always slipped under the rug, because instead of asking myself the question of why am I doing this? Should I be going out tonight? Instead of staying in, I'm really asking myself the question of why not? So in that way, you lose the essence of like why you're doing the things that you're doing, which leads into the second point that I was going to share, which is accountability. When we ask ourselves the question of why not instead of why, we become less accountable to our actions. In a way that we become moved and shaken and according, and we become victim of other people's needs and desires and their value system, not ours. For example, if someone actually values being out on a Friday night, dancing and doing all this thing, that's their value, but it may not be my value, because they come and tell me that they want to do that, and I say, why not? I'm now accountable to their own value system, not to mine. And in that way, I cannot be responsible, or I don't hold myself as responsible as I would have held myself if I had asked myself the question of why. And I think last week we were talking a lot about what it means to be an authentic self and how that connects back to our values. And in a way that if you're asking yourself a question of why not most of the time, then you're not very tied closely and to your values. You're not living within the foundation and the coreness of your values. You cannot take accountability for what's going on. You cannot take responsibility for what ends up happening when you go out in the night, because you haven't really taken time to figure out what is it that it motivates your why? What is it that pushes you to leave the house? What is it that pushes you to say yes to that friend asking you for a favor? What that pushes you to like make a certain decision over the other? And the third and most important point of them all is that it makes you more intentional. So if you're very clear on why you're doing the thing that you're doing, whether you choose to go or you choose to stay, you're more intentional about, this is what I'm actually doing. And because your motivations are now clear, and you're now more accountable because your motivations are clear, you're now more accountable and attached to the idea of why you're doing what you're doing. Intentionality is the only way to get what you want, right? Essentially out of life. You cannot get what you want by just doing whatever. Like when we get exactly what we want, it's because we put exactly what's going to help us get what we want. If we want an A in an exam, it means you're working hard to get that A. It's the same thing with life and with the question of why or why not, when we are just pulled by other people's whys and we're not really thinking about why we're doing something for our own selves and coming up with reasons why we're doing what we're doing, we are not very intentional in that way. And most of the time we don't even know why we're doing what we're doing. And if someone asks you like, why are you doing this? You cannot come up with a reason. Like if you were to see me at a club at any day, like people would ask you, so could a question, why are you here? I'm like, no, it's the vibes, man. It's the vibes. I'm going with the vibes. That word is really throwing us out. Like it's the why not child. That's like the why not bastard child. bastard child that that has come as a result of us. Essentially, as a society, we've just said we're going with the vibe, but you should never go with the vibe. You should go with the why, because the why is the only way to get whatever it is that you're seeking out of life. So just to recap what we talked about, we talked about why it's important to ask yourself why instead of asking yourself why not, and how asking yourself why is so connected back to your values, which makes you more authentic about your approach to your values. And we showed this authentic self through three main things. We say that when you ask yourself why, then you're more clear on your motivations for doing something. If those motivations are not so nice and not so good given your own values, then it's a moment for you to say, oh, actually, I don't want to be doing that. Or if you do want to continue doing that, you're more accountable for you doing that, which is the second point, that because the motivations are very clear, you're more accountable in either the positive direction or the negative direction, which is something that's very good, which leads to our third and last point, which is that it makes you more intentional. Now you're very clear on that this thing is negative or it's positive, and I want to do it or I don't want to do it. So when you do it or you don't do it, you're more intentional, and it gives you the best and possible results. I do want you to please try this. It has changed my life. Whenever I'm having a really hard time thinking about, should I go here? Should I do this? What decision should I make? What's best for me and stuff like that? I always ask myself the question of why. Why are we doing this? I think my girlfriend is almost tired of me asking her all the time, what's the goal? That's essentially the same question I'm always asking myself. What is the goal of doing this? It's the same thing as asking why. Why are we doing this? What is the outcome that we're hoping for? In that way, it helps us be more streamlined. It helps us know what our values are. It helps us know what we're trying to get out of it. It helps us know what our motivations are, and also where our places of our blind spots are, so we can find information if we need to. It helps us be very clear and intentional and directed, and everything just works out just because we're asking ourselves the question of why. If you're struggling right now thinking of whether you should be cheating on your girlfriend or not, I know that sounds funny, but I know there are a lot of guys out there who have struggled with that question. I have personally struggled with it too, of should I be out there in the streets? This is a moment for you to step back and reflect on, why should I do it? Instead of why not? Because that's a harder question to answer, right? Why not? For example, the idea of the question that I just raised of should I cheat or should I not? I think we look at that question and we're like, yeah, why shouldn't I? It's harder to answer, right? And we take that complexity to mean, we sometimes take the complexity of not having a clear, concise answer to mean that we should go ahead and do something. Why shouldn't I go out? We take that answer of I don't really have an answer to why not, as it's almost as a go ahead for us doing whatever we want to do. But it really is the opposite if we don't have a reason why we should be doing something. I hope that was beneficial. I'm your man. My name is Kudo Kwashe. You know me here on the podcast. Please tune in next week. We're doing this every week. We're trying to share the knowledge and share the wisdom in an opportunity and a hope to increase your freedom. And we believe that as an organization and as a podcast, that freedom can really be found through vulnerability and openness and sharing, both of information, but of our lives, our struggles, our pains, and hopefully that you're good out there wherever you are. Thank you for tuning in. Bye for now.